I really loved Montreal. I mean, it's such a different, more laid-back vibe here. Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. We're in the month of May now, and it's the perfect time for traveling. The weather is just awesome for that. So last year in the month of May, I, my husband, and my brother, the three of us actually made a trip to Montreal. And I just didn't manage to get this video out. There was never a right time, but well, here it is, our first time in Montreal. We departed from Union Station in Toronto at 6:30 a.m. in the morning. This is the path that the Via Rail took, and after 6 hours, we finally arrived in Montreal. And here you can see that each of us only has one backpack on our shoulders. If my trip is less than a week, then I try to just pack everything into my backpack because that just makes it super easy to get around. And here we are, we arrived at the Gare Centrale in Montreal, or the Central Station, and we were just super excited. We walked out of the station, and this is, by the way, how it looks like from the outside. And it really has an interesting design. And when I looked it up, I found out that the architecture of the Central Station here is a mixture of Art Deco and International style. So once we set foot on the street in Montreal, I really noticed that it had a very different vibe compared to Toronto. So we really wanted to explore everything, but when we arrived, we were just so hungry. And our first destination was a cafe, a quite famous cafe near the Central Station called Le Petit Depp. And it was about a 16-minute away from the station. So we just walked through the downtown area to get to the cafe. But of course, we had to make so many stops just to take footage and pictures. And our first stop was Victoria Square. It was a weekday around 1 p.m. and we saw plenty of people, I think, working in offices nearby, just sitting there in the park and eating their sandwiches for lunch. And by the way, guys, talking about the weather, in the month of May, last year, it was around mid-May, it was super hot in Montreal. It was around 34 degrees Celsius. Yes, I'm not kidding. At that time in Toronto, it was much, much cooler. And that's quite interesting, considering that in the winter, at least from what I know, Montreal is colder than Toronto. But that might have just been an outlier, and probably if you go this year in May, it won't be as hot. But if anyone from Montreal is watching this video right now, then I would really love to hear from you. What is the weather like in general in the month of May? At Victoria Square, there is this entryway here that was actually made in 1900 by a French artist, and it was installed here in 1967. And just walking through the old town in Montreal is really an experience. The buildings are so old, I mean in a good way, of course, dating back to the 17th century. And I've been to Paris once when I was studying in Germany, and I feel this is really a small taste of Paris. I know it's not exactly the same, but it kind of gives you that vibe. And by the way, if you're living in Montreal, let me know what you think about this comparison. Do people from outside Montreal oftentimes tell you that Montreal reminds them of Europe? And do you like that comparison, or does that annoy you? So finally arriving at Le Petit Depp. It's almost 2, and yes, we're starving. And heads up, this place is a touristy place, but well, we are tourists. And it got a lot of raving reviews, so we thought that we just had to check it out. And it didn't disappoint. The moment we stepped in, it was really lovely, and it had this really unique decoration. And after a quick look at the menu, we got chicken wraps, creme-filled donuts, latte, and Americano. And it cost us $37 in total for the three of us. And at this point, you might be wondering, that's really not a lot of food. Is that enough? So we actually had snacks like a little breakfast back on the train, but this is actually a kind of a budget balancing strategy that I oftentimes use during travels. So instead of having a full-size lunch and a full-size dinner, what we usually do is just to have a very light brunch and save some money on that. Then in the early afternoon, have a coffee and a little snack, and then go all out during dinner time. Because that way, I just think you can get more bang for your buck. And I'll show you the dinner later. This sacrifice, having a smaller lunch, was really worth it. The food was much better than I expected, and they even had ice cream, but we didn't get to try that. And also the coffee I thought was pretty good. I'm not saying that it was the best food of all, but this cafe with this charming setting was just a different experience. By the way, guys, if you're enjoying this video so far, then please do me a favor and hit the like button. That would help this video to get out to more people. I would really appreciate it. Thank you. So after almost 1 hour at Le Petit Depp, we were on our way to the Notre-Dame. Not this Notre-Dame. The official name is the Notre-Dame Basilica of Montreal. So again, we walked while admiring the beautiful buildings. Just look at this stone sidewalk. This is just so beautiful. So this is the Notre-Dame Basilica, and at that time it was under construction. There's this little town square, and there was even a musician playing quite good music, I would say. So some real talent here. And this whole atmosphere, this town square, really reminds me of Germany, where I used to live. And here's the gorgeous Notre-Dame. So even though there was some renovation going on the exterior, it was open to the public. And there's a weekday and also a Sunday mass schedule, but you do not have to attend mass to visit. As a tourist, you can actually just buy a ticket, and at that time you had to buy the ticket online. I am not sure if it's different now, and then you would be able to visit the Basilica. So in the end, we just decided to perhaps go another day, but in the end, we ended up not going there. But as you will see in a moment, coincidentally, we came across another really beautiful chapel that was free to visit. So we continued walking through the old town to just see as much as possible before stopping for a cold beer later. And here in the old town, there are really so many nice cafes and restaurants, and it kind of also reminded me of the city of Heidelberg in Germany, where I used to study. So a lot of small streets and alleyways with stone pavements. And because the weather was so warm, there were quite a lot of restaurants who just had their windows wide open. Then we suddenly saw this chapel here. It was not planned. This is the Notre-Dame de Bon Secours, which turned out to be the oldest chapel in Montreal. It was built 350 years ago. And this chapel was just gorgeous. I mean, just look at the ceilings here and the glasswork. And this was the first pilgrimage site here in Montreal. And just look at all the ship miniatures hung throughout the chapel. A bit about the history here. Welcome to the Notre-Dame de Bon Secours Chapel, the first Marian pilgrimage site of Montreal, founded by Marguerite Bourgeois in 1655. In times of both joy and trial, the chapel was an important place of healing for the people of New France. Through the welcome it extended to new immigrants, the chapel later became the birthplace of the English-speaking Catholic community in Montreal. And I just found it great that we were able to visit it for free. You could make a small donation, but that is totally up to you. It was rather quiet that day, and it felt just so peaceful, so I would really recommend you visiting this chapel. And from here, we went on to visit the Bon Secours market nearby. It was just a 1-minute walk from there. And inside the building here, it has a lot of boutiques with handcrafted items. But we didn't stay too long here because none of us wanted to really shop. So instead, what we did was just grab a paper map. So guys, if you visit Montreal and you need a paper map, then you can get it here at the Bon Secours market. And I don't know about you, of course you can use Google Maps, but there's just something about having a physical map in your hands, right? It just really makes you feel like a tourist. And the next stop was going to be the Clock Tower, also one of the iconic sites in Montreal, which is across the Vieux Port, or the Old Port of Montreal. And it's really easy to find it because there's a clear signage pointing toward it. So there it is, the clock tower. But guys, I must tell you, it was actually not such a good idea to visit the clock tower at this time of the day. I think it was around 2 or 3 p.m. and it was super hot. The sun was really glaring. So I'd say that the early mornings or late afternoons would probably be a better time to go here. So we walked around the harbor with all these boats, and it was really a spectacular view here. And there are actually a lot of activities you can do here. There's a giant wheel, a zip line, boat excursion, jet boating. But we just didn't want to spend a lot of time on the attractions because we were trying to do more things that were free. Yes, we were traveling on a budget, and there were so many other things and places to see that didn't cost us any money. Arriving at the clock tower. So the clock tower marks the entrance to the old port of Montreal, and from here you can see the famous Jacques Cartier Bridge over there. And the clock tower is also known as the Sailors' Memorial Clock and was dedicated to the sailors who died in the First World War. And around there are these huge umbrellas you can just sit under. But it was so hot, around 36 degrees Celsius that day, so we didn't stay long, and we decided it was finally time for a beer. So we headed back to the old town and went to the first brewery we came across, which was Bruski, and it happened to be really great. So Bruski, this place was just awesome. They brew all their own, all Canadian beer, mostly from Quebec. And here we got sampler. It had 4 different beers, and one of them was a smoothie beer, the red one here. Sorry, it's called a flight of beers. And I really loved the relaxed atmosphere here on the terrace. And there's also indoor seating here, but in the summer I definitely recommend sitting on the terrace. So after that flight of beer, we also got some regular sized beers, and in total we spent $33.50. Planning our next move, it was already 4:30 p.m. Yes, time went by so fast, and we wanted to get to the Airbnb that we rented. And instead of just taking an Uber or public transportation, we just decided to bike to the Airbnb, which was, I think, around 20-ish minutes away. So here in Toronto, we have something similar called bike share. Over there in Montreal, it's called Bixi. And after using Bixi, I would say that Bixi is definitely better than what we have here in Toronto. So here we are renting our bikes from the machine, and it was pretty straightforward. Yes, we did have to pay a deposit, and I won't go into the details of how to rent a Bixi bike. If you want to know more about that, then you can check out the video that I link up here. So in summary, it costs $1 to unlock one bike, and then it costs 15 cents for each minute. So the great thing is that you just pay on a per minute basis, and you just pay as much as you use. And we stored our backpacks in the front of the bike. And by the way, that's the great thing about traveling with just a backpack. You're super flexible. If we had these large suitcases, then we would not be able to do this. And guys, I really recommend doing this. Montreal, the city, is really made for biking. The biking infrastructure in Montreal is just really, really great. And if you're there for a couple of days, I would really recommend it as your mode of transportation. These Bixi stations where you return your bike to are just everywhere. You can find one, I think, within every 1 kilometer or 1 mile. So it is really easy to return these bikes. And it is such a wonderful experience to just bike through the city and explore it that way. So here you go. It took us 25 minutes to get to our Airbnb. Not too bad. And we rode our bikes along the river, so the site was also really pretty. So this is the place we stayed at. Bear in mind, this was last year, prices of last year. So this Airbnb was in the area called Hochelaga or Hochelaga, and it was a really good deal, I think, at $585, including tax, for 3 nights, which could accommodate the 3 of us. There were 2 separate bedrooms, so it amounted to around $195 per person for 3 nights. So here you can see there were 2 bedrooms, and one of the bedrooms in the lower picture also had a working desk, and the rooms were also pretty spacious. In general, because this was outside of the downtown area, we were able to get a much more spacious place than we would have gotten downtown. And the great thing about staying at an Airbnb is also that we had the washer and dryer. We didn't need to bring many clothes, we could just wash it there. And that was very important to us because after this trip, we would continue to go to Kingston. But that's a story for another video. So after resting for a while and each of us taking a shower, we decided it was time for dinner. And boy, we had a really hard time deciding for a place. There were so many nice restaurants in the area. But as we were approaching 7 p.m. and we were getting really hungry, we finally decided, okay, let's go to this French restaurant called Bagatelle Bistro, while at the same time checking out the Hochelaga area at night. So here we are walking to the restaurant, and right across the street we saw, I guess it's a Shoppers. It just had another name. It's called Pharmaprix. And on the way we also saw a ton of other great looking restaurants, like this one here, for example, called Helicopter, is also supposed to be good. So here we are at Bagatelle. Just look at the atmosphere and the lights. So I was really, really excited, but unfortunately we did not make a reservation and there was a waiting list. So we put our name on the guest list and just walked around the area. So we were looking for a wine and beer shop, sort of like an LCBO, but LCBO is the place where you get liquor in Ontario. So here in Montreal, we thought there must be something similar to that. And here we saw the SAQ or SAQ. Please, anyone who's living in Montreal, please tell me how you say this name. Do you say SAQ or SAQ? So anyway, this place is similar to the LCBO in Ontario, if you're familiar with that. After looking it up online, it seems to also be government owned, and it has a monopoly on alcohol sales in Quebec. Interesting. We were actually looking for beer, but we found out that different than the LCBO in Toronto and Ontario that carries all sorts of beers, wine, and liquor, here at the SAQ or SAC, it mainly sells just wines and liquors. So I went to ask an employee whether or not they had any beer, and she said that in Montreal, beers are mainly sold at corner stores. Interesting. Here at the SAQ, there's only a tiny selection of beers. So in the end, we just decided to grab a bottle of rosé for around $12 and headed back to the restaurant. We knew that the restaurant we were going to eat at, Bagatelle, would be pretty pricey, so instead of buying our wine there, we thought, why not just get a bottle and drink it back at the Airbnb? So on our way back, we came across one of these corner stores. Here's an example of it. This is a store, Le Biérologue, that specializes in beer, and there are tons of other corner stores that also sell beer. So back at the Bagatelle, it was around 8:30 p.m. already, so really about time to eat. There are indoor seats which looked really cozy, but since the weather was just so nice and at night it wasn't that hot anymore, we decided to sit outside. And it was just such a lovely atmosphere. So here are the menus, and yes, it turned out to be very pricey. But remember, we purposely went very frugal on lunch so we could splurge a bit on dinner. We basically ordered a bunch of items here and just shared everything, Asian style I would call it. After ordering, first came this wonderful baguette with butter, which was just lovely. And this menu here is called the Bagatelle Terre, which had black pudding, spring rolls, beef tartare, duck breast, and foie gras. So I know that beef tartare is not everyone's thing. It's not really my thing either, but here at this restaurant, it was done so well, so it didn't taste like raw meat at all. It just tasted so smooth and it went so well with the bread. And just look at how nicely it's plated. And this over here is the Quebec veal flank steak, which came with either salad or soup. So here are the yummy fries. And this one was my favorite. This is the warm goat cheese with figs and maple syrup and bread. And it was just so good. And by the way, we just drank water here because remember, we were going to drink the booze at the Airbnb. And for dessert, we just shared this little crème brûlée here, which was so delicious. So in total, there were 3 orders plus this little dessert, and one of the orders was actually an appetizer, but for the 3 of us, it just worked out perfectly. And sharing all these plates was just a very fun way to do it. Instead of everyone just ordering their own food, we just kept on rotating the plates, and that was just so much fun. And here, the 3 of us spent $133, including tax and tip. I mean, it's expensive, but it's not something that we would eat every day. And the food was really uniquely French, so it was really worth trying it. Before leaving, we just took a quick look inside. I think I would sit here during daytime, especially when it's scorching hot outside. So that was day 1 in Montreal, guys. It was such a magical experience. If you want to know what we did on day 2 and day 3, then make sure that you're subscribed and also hit the notification bell so that YouTube will notify you when my next video is up. And I'll be launching those videos pretty soon. Until then, thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you soon.